Welcome to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and this video will leave you wondering if you really are safe in your own home. You know, I think there is a lot to be said about home. It's a place you can retreat to, put your feet up, avoid all forms of social contact, but most importantly, feel safe. So when an intruder steps through that personal boundary, it's not only deeply violating, but greatly unexpected too. And so with that in mind, this story is right up there when it comes to cruel and mindless crime. And unfortunately, the entire thing could have been avoided with the simple click of a key. Before we begin, please consider subscribing for true crime, strange and chilling stories weekly. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Amanda Blackburn. Our story today takes us to the heart of Indianapolis, a city steeped in community values and small-town hospitality, where, useful context, more than 83% of its residents identify as Christian. Known as the Crossroads of America, many roads from Michigan, Illinois, Kentucky, and Ohio all lead into the state of Indiana and directly into this bustling city. So you can probably guess that Indianapolis is a place where many paths randomly cross, and that furthermore, people from all walks of life unexpectedly come together. However, for the main characters of our story today, I guarantee you that they wish this never happened. And so, enter 28-year-old Amanda and her husband, 30-year-old Davey Blackburn. Known as the community's loving pastor and his gentle wife, the two were a well-respected couple with the world at their feet. Some would even call them the perfect American family, and they were very excited about the future. Amanda and Davey had moved all the way from South Carolina with one objective in mind, and that was to spread the word of God. Between them, they owned the now abolished Resonant Church in the far north of Indianapolis City, and although it has since closed down, it was established in 2011 to spread the gospel's life-giving power. Now, usually you would assume that those who were looking to start their own church would normally be in the latter years of their lives, but not these two. Amanda and Davey were young, ambitious, and modern. Scaling all the way back to the year 2006, the two met in Pensacola Christian College in Florida, and what followed was a deep and fiery relationship. Beginning with Amanda, she was born in the summer of 1987 in Muskegon, Michigan. Her proud parents, Phil and Robin, were already highly religious people, with her father being a pastor at their local church. The family then moved from Michigan to Elkhart, Indiana, alongside her sister Amber and brother James in 1995. Amanda was known to be a kind and a caring child, and she was particularly close with her siblings. Growing into her teenage years, she became exceptionally hardworking and ambitious, throwing herself into her studies and, much to her parents' relief, her church too. She was always well behaved and never had any trouble at home or at school. She eventually graduated from the Elkhart Christian Academy in the year 2006, before then bravely moving away from her family to Florida. And of course, as we already know, this was where she would meet the man who would soon become her husband, and his name was Davey Blackburn. As for Davey, he was a beacon of kindness, humor, and charm, and, although it's cliche to say, was apparently always wearing a smile that could light up any room. As Amanda and Davey grew closer over the following months, they realized that their goals for the future were actually quite similar. While still studying at college, the two decided to move in together before then adopting a dog named Mel, and it is known that the two treated and adored her like their own child. Their photos from this time captures countless happy memories in each other's company, of course with their dog by their side. In fact, by August 2008, which was only 2 years after leaving college, the two decided that their love was so profound and certain that they got married, and this union would only strengthen their bond and bring them even closer. And then, in 2011, they decided to move back to Indianapolis, driven by their shared dream of saving lives by spreading Christ's word. The move would also bring Amanda closer to her family, which did in fact prove to be beneficial, as in the year 2014, the two would welcome their first child to the world, a baby boy named Weston. As a family, they continued to grow. Davey's role as a pastor and their work in establishing a church brought them great fulfillment in life. Amanda stayed active by running many marathons with her siblings and her parents, while Davey maintained his physical and mental health through regular workouts at LA Fitness. Their social media was filled with photos that showcased happiness and the rich life that they led, surrounded by family, friends, a supportive community, and their budding church. And then, in 2015, their richness would deepen even further with the announcement of their second child. Amanda and Davey were simply overjoyed with the news, with Davey convinced that they were destined for a daughter, whom he lovingly named Evie Grace Blackburn. However, sadly, their envisioned future was not the one they would receive, and that's because, in November of 2015, their world was shattered in the most unexpected and harrowing of circumstances.
911, what's the case? Emergency.
Yes, I'm at 2812 Sunnyfield Court, 46228. My wife has collapsed. She is...
Okay, hold on. Stay on the line for EMS. Will I transfer you?
Fire and ambulance. What's the address of your emergency?
2812 Sunnyfield Court, 46228. 2812 Sunnyfield Court.
Is that a house or an apartment?
It is a house.
And your phone number? And what's wrong there?
My wife, I just walked in the door coming back from the gym. She's collapsed. She's breathing right now, but there's blood all over the place coming out of her nose, it looks like. She's still breathing. I didn't want to turn her over.
The date was November the 10th, 2015, and just like any other workday, Davey woke up at around 6 a.m. to do his morning workout. Random side note here, but maybe this is living proof that God actually does exist, because no amount of caffeine could get me out that early. Finishing around 1 hour later, he then returned to the property at around 7:30, before then taking a call in the driveway. You see, Davey was trying to be considerate here, and so rather than wake Amanda up, he took that phone call in the car. Now, usually this wouldn't be considered as suspicious, right? Well, unfortunately, he had no idea that this morning would be very different to the several hundred before. After finishing his phone call, Davey walked inside to a devastating scene. Amanda was lying on the floor in a pool of her own blood, and although she was still breathing, she was unresponsive. Fears for Weston's safety were quickly calmed as, thankfully, he was still upstairs, safe, alive, and well. As soon as he checked to make sure he was okay, Davey then called emergency services and begged them for come to help save Amanda's life. Paramedics arrived quickly at the scene, where they found Davey at the end of the home's driveway with his hands covered in blood. They determined that Amanda had been shot 3 times, once in the back, once in the arm, and a third in the back of her head. Miraculously, she was still breathing, but with her condition being critical, time was running out. She was therefore rushed to the hospital in a desperate attempt to save her life. But despite all the efforts made by the paramedics, both she and her unborn baby would pass away the following day, with Davey holding his wife's hand during her final moments before her heart stopped beating. This tragedy was unimaginably heart-wrenching for him, leaving him to mourn the loss of his wife and their future daughter on what had started as an ordinary November morning. Amidst all of this grief, 3 pressing questions would arise. How had this happened? Who was responsible? And why Amanda? It was obvious that Davey's wife had been murdered in cold blood, and someone, or at least one person, was accountable. But who? And why? It was now up to the authorities to answer those questions through their investigation, but they too would be left dumbfounded. The Blackburn family had no known enemies, debts, or even conflicts with the community. They lived a very peaceful and happy lifestyle, and were well loved by everyone around them. So, despite the investigation beginning, the question why was still on everybody's mind. Taking a look at the evidence would present several clues to the authorities. To begin with, it appeared that there was no forced break-in. Davey and Amanda had faith in their community and felt safe and trusting with their neighborhood, and so as a result, they rarely ever locked their front door. And it turns out that, on the day that Amanda was murdered, the morning was no different, therefore allowing her killers to walk in without any contest or conflict. The home itself was usually very tidy, but the crime scene was vastly different. Detectives observed large blood spatters alongside remnants of brain matter around 5 feet from the body. Meanwhile, Amanda was lying face down and devoid of clothes. Found next to her was her underwear and a scattered mess of mail and bank cards, and notably, not all of them were accounted for. A pack of Swisher cigars, a pair of earphones, and a roll of duct tape were all found on the counter. Davey confirmed that these items did not belong to him or his wife. And as for Amanda's cell phone, well, that was discovered untouched in her bedroom, which thankfully their dog Mel was found trapped but safe and alive. There was one other piece of evidence too. Amanda's phone showed a missed call from Chase Bank at 7:53 that morning, which detectives would soon discover turned out to be an inquiry about suspicious activity on her account. The entire situation suggested a tragedy marked by killers, a home invasion gone wrong. However, with the evidence and clues left behind so obvious, some started to wonder if maybe this was a setup. Some people would even highlight how convenient it seemed that Davey was out of the property at the precise time that Amanda was murdered. I mean, surely this was more than just a coincidence, right? Well, actually, not really, because Davey's schedule was very predictable. Furthermore, if her killers knew that he'd be out for at least an hour, then they may also know that he would leave the front door wide open. Davey also had not one, but several confirmed alibis at the gym. And as for the couple's love life, well, they were absolutely smitten with each other, with a second baby on the way. However, alibis and information aside, this wouldn't stop some people from coming to their own conclusions. Unfortunately, pastors have had a bad rap in the recent decade, and we've seen many go down for scandals, abuse, and even murder. Think of John White, Timothy Tillman, or even Helga Fossmo, which we have covered here on Coffeehouse Crime. So, at least initially, people did seem to be quite skeptical of Davey. In fact, I've just read about the investigation of a Texas megachurch that had to remove 4 leaders who all knew of a pastor's alleged abuse and even murder. Honestly, it is crazy how often these scandals simply fly under the radar. But with so many external sources influencing our mainstream media, I guess it is no wonder why. And that's why I've been using today's sponsor, Straight Arrow News, to keep up to date, as they are my choice for unbiased news. I believe their values are great because they report right down the middle with facts for both sides. No bias, no filter, and no spin. And with their Media Mist tool, you can even discover stories being underreported or even ignored from the left and the right. Go to san.com/coffeehousecrime to check it out. You can visit the link through my description. When you visit, you are not only supporting me, but a group of journalists who are raising the bar on the news and focusing on serving you the truth. That's san.com/coffeehousecrime. Thank you, Straight Arrow News, for supporting us content creators. Now let's get straight back to this case. Following Amanda's tragic murder, Davey launched a campaign to draw attention to her case. He did this by turning to social media, engaging with local news outlets, participating in numerous interviews, and doing everything in his power to spread the news. In doing so, his hope was to uncover a lead that might help identify her killer. However, this activity would also, unfortunately, spur the online amateur sleuths into a frenzy, and some of them would even begin to suspect that Davey himself was responsible for Amanda's death, interpreting his helpful actions as maybe just a way to try and cover up his own tracks. They questioned his lack of visible grief during interviews, wondered why he barely cried, interrogated the 12-minute delay before he called emergency services, and even asked why he would swiftly turn to social media to cope. Despite the barrage of online accusations, Davey's close friends and family would rally around him, trying to shield him from the hatred he found online. Yet, as is human nature, Davey of course could not help but be affected by the public's opinion. Meanwhile, the authorities cleared Davey of any suspicion whatsoever, and instead focused their efforts on unraveling the events of that fateful morning. Now, there is quite a lot of debate around Davey, which we will come back to later in this video, but for all intents and purposes, the detectives were confident that he had nothing to do with her murder. They leaned towards the theory of a home invasion gone wrong, and in their investigation, they noted that the Blackburn home was not the only target of that morning. In fact, it was only one of 3 homes in the neighborhood to be burgled. In addition to this, several others were affected earlier that month, and this pattern of crime lent credence to their belief that Amanda's murder was part of a larger wave of break-ins. Not only that, but one of those invasions, which occurred only 1 week prior, involved a masked man breaking in while the homeowner was in the shower. After breaking in, he then ushered her out at gunpoint before then sexually assaulting her. And as grim as that story may be, it did at least show that it seemed to follow the similar motives of both thievery and sex. High-value items such as jewelry, purses, cell phones, and laptops were stolen in all 3 incidents. However, spare a credit card and a MacBook, almost nothing appeared to be taken at the Blackburn residence, therefore leading the authorities to believe that the intruders were likely interrupted. Naturally, the neighborhood was shaken to its core by Amanda's tragic death. In an act of solidarity, the neighbors collectively handed over all of their home surveillance footage to help the investigating officers. And what do you know? This footage proved to be a crucial asset. To begin with, one neighbor recounted hearing what she believed to be 2 gunshots at around 6:30 that morning, though at the time she dismissed them. As the investigation deepened, more neighbors would come forward with chilling testimonies. Several reported seeing a shadowy figure cloaked in black and with his hood drawn tight, suspiciously talking on the phone at around 7 AM, before then slipping into a silver Chrysler Sebring. And after looking at the local surveillance footage, well, none of them were lying. A surveillance camera captured the unsettling image of a masked man lurking in the shadows before then hopping into a vehicle. And this vehicle, which would be the Chrysler, would be one of the most instrumental pieces of evidence to this case. And that's because it was not actually theirs in the first place, but stolen only a couple of hours prior. At 5:23 that very same morning, a call was made to the Indianapolis police to report that a car had been stolen. And although the owner never saw the perpetrator, she did wake up to find her porch door had been left open and that her cell phone, laptop, purse and car keys were all missing. And of course, her 2007 Chrysler Sebring was not in the spot she had left it. Now, thankfully, her surveillance camera did manage to catch them in the process, and from these images, it is assumed that 3 men were involved with the break-in. And given the timeline, they most likely traveled straight to Davey's and Amanda's home after stealing her vehicle. The terrible thing is that these men cared so little about Amanda being fatally shot that they then carried on with their third heist afterwards. And we know this to be true because only 1 hour later, another phone call was made to 911 reporting yet another burglary, with surveillance cameras in the area capturing the same 3 people. Now, I think we have all been in a situation before where we're doing something that's a little bit stupid or reckless. At least I know I have. But usually, if I hurt myself or have an accident, I then stop and think about what I'm doing. But not these guys. Despite literally murdering someone after a botched robbery, they then decided to go on with their little escapade. To add to that, they didn't seem to be in much of a hurry either, because with the homeowners currently out, they decided to help themselves to an array of belongings. This included 4 televisions, a universal remote, a MacBook Pro, a Tiffany pearl necklace, an expensive sweater, some bed sheets, and even a bag of oranges. In addition to their rather healthy portion of vitamin C, our 3 musketeers decided to then put their feet up and help themselves to several bottles of wine. Not quite the nutritious choice, especially at 8 AM. They would even leave these bottles behind, which was great for officers by the way. It made collecting their DNA very easy. However, the most concrete piece of evidence in this investigation was, of course, the stolen car. And although the license plate had been removed as soon as they stole the vehicle, the authorities still had the make, model, and color. This made it quite easy for officers to find it. In fact, it was so easy that they discovered the vehicle only 1 day later. And that's because whoever decided to dump the vehicle only did so several minutes away from the crime scene. Inside the vehicle, investigators discovered an assortment of items, including an extra large men's sweater, a bag of oranges, a universal remote, a pink men's shirt, and an ATM receipt that indicated a failed payment to withdraw $500 from Amanda's now missing debit card. The ATM receipt was then traced back to a gas station which was near Amanda's and Davey's home. Police officers realized that, while one of the men had tried to conceal his identity by wrapping the pink shirt around his face, he had also failed to remember to take that shirt with him when he abandoned the car. And, of course, such a stupid move would leave behind an easy trace of DNA on the shirt. DNA that would ultimately come back with a key link in solving this case. And that's because the DNA matched to 21-year-old Jalen E. Watson, a man who had recently been released on parole for, surprise surprise, burglary. While analysing his profile, officers discovered that Watson's previous crimes were in fact connected with an accomplice named Deano Gordon. It turns out that both men were being monitored during their parole, which included tracking of their cell phone activity. And after some rather careful triangulation, they realised that this monitoring confirmed that both men were at all 3 locations of the burglaries that morning, with the ATM machine included. Further investigations showed that Watson and Gordon made several phone calls that morning, which included a third individual, that being 18-year-old Larry Joe Taylor Jr. And just like that, the authorities finally had her 3 guys. After triangulating their cell phone numbers, investigators realized that all 3 suspects had been together the night prior. And after visiting their landlord, she was able to confirm that they had left together at approximately 3:30 that morning, taking her boyfriend's handgun and a shirt with them in the process. Both of these items would positively match the evidence recovered from the crime scene, with the gun even matching a second murder committed earlier that month. And so, only 11 days after Amanda's death, Larry Joe Taylor was arrested on suspicion of murder, theft, and breaking and entering. And by December, both Jalen and Deano followed. Perhaps one of my favourite patterns here, but when multiple parties are arrested, it is relatively common for them to turn on each other in the process. And, of course, this would happen between these 3 suspects. It's kind of like watching an argument happen between 3 clowns at the circus. But instead of a pie on the face, the argument is served with lifetime punishments. Deano was the first one to cave in, accepting a plea deal in exchange for throwing his friends under the bus. According to him, all 3 had agreed to rob multiple homes that morning. However, it was Larry who suggested they bring a gun. After breaking and entering, Larry would then enter the victim's bedroom while they slept. This was probably more for the adrenaline kick than anything else, and, well, he was safe with that firearm in his hand. But unfortunately, this would not work with Amanda, and in response, the crime changed from robbery to a hostage situation. Armed with a handgun, Larry held Amanda hostage while the other 2 then drove to an ATM machine with her credit card. Phone records would show that they kept in contact through multiple phone calls over this time frame. And when her PIN failed, Larry realized that Amanda was not prepared to part with her money. That is when he hung up the phone and then forced himself upon her. Amidst the struggle, he then shot her 3 times, with Amanda collapsing in the process. After that, he then phoned his friends to pick him up, which further explains the surveillance footage capturing him getting into the Chrysler. Deano would also tell the investigators that Larry seemed to be proud of his actions, and had even stood over her while he watched her bleed out. Unfazed by the events, he then told them to focus and prepare for their 3rd and final home. In light of the news, Larry's charges were therefore upgraded to 1 count of burglary, robbery resulting in serious bodily harm, criminal confinement, auto theft, carrying a gun without a license, and 2 counts of felony murder. For reasons that will soon become important to the story, it is worth noting here that his 2 murder charges were focused on Amanda and the man he had allegedly murdered earlier in the same year, but not Amanda's baby. Deano held up his plea deal against Larry, and Jalen was close to follow behind. And so, ultimately, with both men now against him, Larry was sure to lose his trial eventually. I say eventually because, rather frustratingly, there would be 2 mistrials before any deliberation took place, and this was due to technicalities around Amanda's pregnancy. You see, with there being no murder charges related to Amanda's baby, the judge declared that no mention of her pregnancy was allowed during his trial. But with several members of the jury declaring their own acknowledgement of her pregnancy, it meant that, sadly, the trial could not proceed. As a result, Larry agreed to a bench trial, which meant that no jury was needed and only the judge would determine his fate. Which he is probably regretting now, because that judge would go down on him like a sack of potatoes. Ultimately, Larry Taylor was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 86 years behind bars, meaning that he will never walk as a free man again. The trials of Deano Gordon and Jalen Watson occurred earlier in March of 2021, and with their plea deals in place, they were charged with 2 counts of burglary and a charge of robbery resulting in serious bodily harm, with 5 other charges against the men dropped as a result of their plea deal. Jalen received 29 years in prison, which was eventually reduced to 15, with at least 10 years to be served behind bars. Diano, on the other hand, received 30 years for his involvement, with 25 to be spent behind bars and 5 on probation. Now, I have no idea why Jalen's and Diano's sentences were so different in this case. Considering Diano was the first to agree to a plea deal and cooperate with the officers, you would expect him to receive a shorter sentence and not longer. Yeah, but then again, who cares? With their trials taking place in 2021 and 2022, Amanda's loved ones would have to endure 7 long years of pain before they could finally seek closure. With Davey, who had lost his wife and his unborn baby in the process, at the epicenter of this anguish. He admits that, following the murder, he felt rage like any other and had to fight thoughts of bigotry and racism towards Amanda's killers. But throughout those 7 years, he eventually learned to see them in a different light and finally show mercy. No doubt, religion must have played a massive part in his healing process. However, there was some controversy around Davey's story, and that's because not even 1 year after Amanda's death, he found himself in a new relationship, and then 1 year after, he was remarried. Now, of course, there is no written rule on how one should grieve or not grieve after the death of their partner, but some did find it quite odd how quickly he moved on. Personally, I think I'm in the middle with this one, because I don't think I could do the same, but I do understand that some people are different. Obviously, this decision would only fuel some of his doubters even further, and in fact, even to this day, some still believe he was involved. But honestly, I think this is quite ridiculous, because not only was there no evidence to tie Davey to the crime scene, but none of her killers tried to blame him either. Despite moving on with his new life, Amanda still seems to be on his mind with every day that passes. In his book, he lightheartedly says, "I always joke about this, that one day we're going to get to heaven and I'm going to get a chance to introduce the two of them, and then they're going to talk about all their frustrations with me, and they're going to share all kinds of beautiful memories of Weston." With Amanda having been an avid runner, Davey feels as if Amanda has passed the baton on to Christy. It wasn't something she voluntarily did because, well, obviously, Amanda didn't know that this was going to happen, but it's something that helps Davey and Christy keep their minds and memories at peace. Much like the rest of her loved ones, they remember Amanda as a beautiful, loving, and selfless individual who would have done anything to help another person out. Her family and loved ones feel deep sadness through their loss, a loss that will likely never be refilled. I'm going to end this video with one more quote from Davey's book. In his words, he said, "Amanda was probably the most selfless person you have ever met in your entire life. She made her life about other people, and that's why people were so impacted by her. We all felt like Amanda cared about us, loved us, because she didn't make her life about herself." I think that is one of the most amazing attributes about Amanda, is that she lived her life for something bigger than herself, and she wanted her life to be poured out to help other people. She was faithful, she was steadfast, she was balanced, she was rhythmic. You know, I think this is one of those stories where, although it's fully solved, there's always going to be about 10% of people who watch this and still think Davey was involved. Again though, I really don't see how, but as always, I'd love to know what you think about this one, so please do share your thoughts below. With that said, I think I've pretty much come to the end of this story. Thank you so much for watching this video today, folks. I really do appreciate you being here. Thank you again to Straight Arrow News for sponsoring this video. Go to san.com/coffeehousecrime to check it out. The next video will be out in probably a few days, so until that moment arrives, please remember to look after yourselves and each other. And of course, enjoy the festive season. I'll see you again very, very soon, folks. Thank you, and goodbye.